Hey guys, cheers for tuning in to another video. In this video we talk about Cataclysm Classic being released relatively soon to the classic servers in World of Warcraft, in the version of game that actually continues on from the past. So Wrath is coming to a wrap. The pre-patch is coming soon. I'm not really going to talk about anything about the pre-patch in this video. If it's exactly the same as before, it is what it is. Much of the pre-patch that I remember for Cataclysm was the insane scaling and tuning it gave level 80 characters. They were really powerful, but in terms of content, it is what it was. So some of the premises of videos I want to talk about: should Cataclysm be a thing in classic servers? Because for a lot of players, including myself, Cataclysm isn't classic. It completely revamps the world of Azeroth, Kalimdor and Eastern Kingdoms especially, and your leveling experience is completely changed. It doesn't mean the level experience is actually bad. A lot of zones saw improvement, though some people would argue some zones saw a negative leveling experience, such as Thousand Needles and Shimmering Flats as it were, which that one I would agree with. But the rest of the zones that they revamped were positive in my eyes. The game needed it at that particular point to go forward, but the old zones and how they were, the whole experience, the flow, the just what you did, they got redone. You can't redo it anymore. So the only way to experience that is Classic Era or Season of Discovery as the time at the current time. So because of this new shattered world, what is Classic? What is it? Is it just for people to experience how World of Warcraft evolved, how we got to the point where we are now? Because if that's the current sort of prerogative of Blizzard, then yes. However, we've seen in Wrath they've made some additions. Now I think they're positive additions. Now all of this obviously is in the power of Captain Hindsight, and yes, some of the additions they've made would have been amazing at the time. So honestly speaking, when Blizzard do make these changes, I think they're for the greater good, and actually they would represent some grounds of experimentation to see in retail World of Warcraft, and vice versa as well. So I don't see these as a negative. I think these additions really add to the whole experience of all of World of Warcraft. So with Cataclysm Classic, we're going to see some returning features that came with this expansion. So just to give a rundown of features, we're going to be seeing obviously the Shattered World. We're going to see the return of Rated Battleground, which I think should never have been removed. We're going to see reforging. This isn't going to add any new dungeons, any new raids that didn't came with the expansion, which makes sense. Some of the things we're going to be seeing new is going to be the Titan rune system, which they brought into Wrath. This is the Classic's version of Mythic Plus in some kind of variation. Another level difficulty up. This gives dungeons more replayability, and it gives Blizzard a better opportunity to really mess with scalability without... What's my perspective on this? Now, I'm someone that played Cataclysm a lot when it was out. I don't know how I did. I'm going to touch upon the negatives a bit later, but I played it a lot. I spent many hours in that expansion. I did have a lot of fun, at least to start with. This is the expansion that brought in a lot of new features, a lot of revamping, which is still seen to this day. Some of the features introduced to this expansion lives to the modern World of Warcraft to this day, and actually by extension, other MMOs as well. It also tells developers around the world that make other MMOs, you can revamp your existing game. It can be done. It does come at a great cost. It does break sentiment with players and nostalgia. And actually, in the current vein of things, I would say it's benefited Blizzard with how Cataclysm has been introduced in the first place, and the wanting for that, and their additions and delivery of. This is also the expansion, like I said, that the real real old Classic ends. You cannot do any of the old content anymore. The leveling, experience flow, the quest lines, I would argue, simplicity, the angst of some of the quest lines. They've definitely revamped the drop rates of quests. Quests don't really have the abysmal drop rates. If you're after 3 items of a quest and you need to basically cause an extinction level with bears, boars, or whatever it is. It was absurd, and not to mention that led to camping, or you had to deal with other players. Season Discovery really highlights this matter in a really big way. But Cataclysm didn't really have shared mob tagging anyway, but it just alleviated that with better drop rates on the quests, so it made for a smoother experience from that going forward. So this is where Blizzard really thought about the quest lines and the questing experience from start to finish. Cataclysm is also the expansion where things went really downhill for Blizzard for this game. Many people would assume that was Walls of Draenor. Walls of Draenor was probably the biggest hit, but Cataclysm was actually where it really happened. The gameplay was still largely the same, so, when you wait for, I don't know, the final patch in Wrath was like over a year long, then they came into this, then, people felt frustrated. But this isn't going to be a thing with a Classic perspective. They're fixing all of the canons where it should be. They've actually said in their presentation, and I say it multiple times, when it comes to the patches, if they're going to be small patches, they're going to be shorter lived. If it's a bigger patch, they're going to be larger. So they are mindful of how long a patch should be based on what is delivered in there, which also makes me question a little bit why they can't just fix those patches anyway to make them a little bit more worthwhile to be released, instead of just having a shorter cadence for a smaller patch. Just fix what made it short in the first place. To those that have not played Cataclysm, and this is a first time experience in it, to my opinion, the leveling experience in Cataclysm was amazing. The new zones were amazing. I loved how they were still largely attached to the current world of Azeroth, and you could go in between. There weren't a new continent, so I think this was a very positive way of keeping things down to Azeroth as it were. And the initial raiding experience was great fun. We had several raids of different sort of difficulty, sort of themes, pacing as well, and that was really good. What really hurt Blizzard, more so than the delay of the expansion, was coming into Firelands patch. Now I think a lot of negative points I'm going to be talking about the expansion probably starts here. So what was Firelands patch? I forgot the name of the patch. I'll put it somewhere here. This was a very small major patch that outlived its cycle. The patch only included the raid and the legendary quest for casters and a rep faction. That was all. This added no new dungeon. This added no new zones. This retweaked Mount Hargil a little bit, but nothing particularly. Then after that, then it was a case of then what? This was a time before dungeons had any kind of scalability. It would have been nice if Blizzard also went, do you know what? We know this was a weak patch. Let's add additional dungeons. Let's think of a mega dungeon maybe to add. It should be noted, guys, the Firelands patch wasn't delayed. The release cycle for it was actually pretty on point. Was the revamping of the old zones really taxing? Was some of the additional systems, such as the transmog system and the reforging system, very taxing to add in? Then we had the Dragon Soul raid, which actually as a raid was fine. The bosses were nice. Thematically, it was a bit meh. It wasn't very a visually nice raid because it reused a lot of old stuff. But what that patch introduced was something very major to the addition of World of Warcraft, as big as, if not bigger than, looking for group dungeon system that allows you to queue in. So looking for raid was everything you know now. But this was the system that set the tone for something very contentious with the player base. Raiding has always been a very prestige thing to the player base. Like, you kind of need to have earned to be able to do it. Like, you need to do pre-prep, you needed to get some gear in order to meet the minimum what you needed to do. And just quickly before we go into what they should be doing with Cataclysm Classic with all of these introduced systems. So of course we had transmog system, so that's the modern World of Warcraft just has a more revamped version of it. And I believe that's the modern iteration of it is mostly being introduced. These days you just have like an account system. I don't believe they're going to be doing that, but they said it's going to be account shared, so maybe. But we'll see how it gets introduced into the Cataclysm Classic expansion. We see the introduction of reforging. Now, reforging in my eyes should not be added to Cataclysm Classic. It got removed actually quite quickly down the line. I believe it got removed in Wall of the Draenor, or maybe after it. But it got removed. Now we need to question why it got removed, or rather why it got added in the first place. Now back then, one of the prominent stats which people hated, which was the stat hit. This was a making sure that your attacks or spells make contact with said bosses in raid. So when people had excessive hit on their gear, was able to change about 40% of it, 40% of a given stat into something else they can make use of. Both the stat hit and reforging actually got removed. So in my eyes, if there's a feature that ended up removing down the line, they should not have introduced it in the first place. In my opinion, if there is a system that's active in modern World of Warcraft, then that should be introduced earlier on instead of down the line. Reforging should not be there because we don't have it in modern World of Warcraft. I don't think it was a great feature, it was a crux. It also meant you had to carry several types of loot in your bag that fill the same slot. It was really horrible having like 2 chest pieces, 2 leg pieces, 2 trinkets, 2 weapons, because you were constantly switching out the stats via reforging. So when you upgraded an item, you had to side grade another item to make up more hit where you lost it, or reduce it where you had excessive. Concise, clear vision of how you loot, which was you had higher item level, try use it. That was better because it meant you had a more simple end goal. It respected your actual time. And I do think the term respecting players' time is used wrong for a lot of people in a lot of MMOs, where they apply it with difficulty. I think respecting players' time and difficulty are not the same thing. You can have something easy or difficult and they can still respect your time. You can have something that takes a long time or done very quickly, yet still respects your time. And any combination of those, it can be a very difficult thing but very short, it can be a very easy thing but take very long, or whatever combination. What isn't respecting your time is, you know you have an end gear point. You know this loot, this tier piece for example, is what you want, what you need, but you can't use it to its full potential because you've been messing around with other stats and you lose out on some stats, or you get excessive amount of hit, so you don't want to use it. You have it in your bag but you don't use it. That's not respecting your time. You spend all of this time, all this effort to gain said item, but you don't feel compelled to use it. So reforging as a system doesn't respect your time due to the amount of excessive items you need to acquire in order to make full use out of it. So I don't think it's a good idea for Blizzard to introduce problem systems that either are problems themselves or get removed down the line. What I really think they should be doing with the classic experience, continuation experience, is any successful systems they have in the game should be brought earlier, So we're getting possibly the revamped version of Transmog, which is great. I think the looking for raid system should be in from the launch of the expansion, not in Dragon Soul. So I really do think looking for raid should be introduced when the expansion launches. I think there's any negative systems that they ended up removing to be removed sooner. So for example, as they're going to remove the stat hit, they might as well do it now, so that it doesn't necessitate the need for the reforging system, but also because it's going to be taken away anyway, you might as well introduce the positive direction now than later. Because if they can introduce these positive systems, it makes where the patches were weak in those expansions more bearable, or have a way to improve them more significantly. For example, if we go over the Firelands patch, having a looking for raid would mean there's more to do on a weekly basis. It gives people who found the normal mode very taxing a very way just like being able to experience that content and have a easier, not just easier, I think that's the wrong expression to use, but have a more sensible curve to acquire gear. They absolutely need to make sure that the Titan rune system really scales really well in this patch. I do think they perhaps need to think about, actually, we're introducing a content called Delves in the War Within, which is a very good way of having a different experience to dungeons and to raids that you could do on a daily basis. I think they need to do that. I think, though that's coming in a future expansion at this point in time, I think they need to do something like that. A small slice of daily repeatable content that you can do either solo or as a group should be brought into this expansion. We see them misadvertising flexible raids. So in Cataclysm, I believe the loot table for 10 and 25 was the same item level. You just got less of it in 10 man. I hate to say it, that makes a bit more sense, but I do think the 25 perhaps gave beyond that. So it gave you more than double the loot. But that was their way of making sure that 25 man were alive. But I think having the same difficulty scale and item level in 10 man was sensible. But this also brings me to the point of flexible raiding in what we see in current modern World of Warcraft. Flexible raiding is a system that is underestimated in terms of how valuable and how powerful it is. Because Cataclysm is an expansion that had a lot of weaknesses. And this is their way, this is their chance of correcting those weaknesses. Having that, what made people turn away, get frustrated, get annoyed, what was really big stickler points, this is a chance to fix that. They definitely did that with Wrath of the Titan rune system, where people felt that the dungeon experience was taken down because the heroics were easier than TBC. And that was their way of reintroducing and correcting that without taking anything away. And where they do add systems into the expansions, the classic expansions, they should actually introduce the superior version to them and not the inferior version at all. So again, I know there's going to be looking for raid in Cataclysm Classic, whether it's going to be the original version or the more superior modern version of how it all sort of operates, with the flexible system, with the way the looting is a little bit more generous. I don't want Blizzard to be releasing the expansions and the weak systems that they had that made it a very terrible experience. But don't take this video as a way of being put off by Cataclysm. If you've been enjoying the Wrath Classic, I think you should enjoy this.